Hello, everyone. So good to see you all. My name is Rashida Slater. I'm here representing Yukon Seed and Restoration. I'm joined today by Crystal Isbister. She is an ecologist and a PhD student studying the definition of success in reclamation. She's one of our most invaluable mentors and cherished collaborators, and she's worked with us on many projects, including our seed collection training workshops, which she will get to tell you more about today. I'm also joined by Steve Reynolds. He is the operations manager at Snowline Gold Corps, and we'll be talking a little bit more about the work that Snowline Gold and YSR are doing together. Yukon Seed and Restoration is a company that specializes in the reclamation of disturbed lands from a community-informed lens. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge and share gratitude to be welcomed as guests on the land here in the traditional territories of the Tonquachon Council and the Kwanlin First Nation. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'll give you an introduction to Yukon Seed and Restoration. We'll talk a little bit about what reclamation is and how we view reclamation. And we will also have Crystal introduce our community training programs. And I will share some of our work with Snowline Gold, and we'll have a quick conversation about our relationship. So Yukon Seed and Restoration was sprouted in Mayo, Yukon in 2018. It's a partnership between the Natchinayak-Dun Development Corporation, which is the economic development arm for the First Nation of Natchinayak-Dun. And their traditional territory is in the Mayo region, along with a local geotechnical and environmental consultant, Core Geoscience. Yukon Seed and Restoration specializes in restoration and reclamation services with native plant materials. Our work focuses on reclaiming disturbed lands to thriving ecosystems through a holistic process that is informed by both traditional values as well as an Indigenous worldview. And our work is successful through the respectful use of native plant materials as well as honorable harvesting practices. And we're working to develop a local native seed supply as well as collecting seeds all across the Yukon. We've worked on projects that include landslide hazard assessment and subsequent land stabilization projects along the Ethel Lake Road. We have done roadside invasive species surveys and revegetation trials. We've worked on short and long-term reclamation plans for mining activities. And we also work collaboratively with communities to develop reclamation and seed collection training programs. So, reclamation is a continuous process of planning, implementing, learning, and adapting. But what does that mean? And what is reclamation? Reclamation has many definitions, and the one that we choose to use is a transition from an industrial state to an alternative agreed upon state. And that is to ensure that we're accounting for the goals of everyone involved in understanding what we look to find in our reclamation process. And we're striving towards shifting to more circular approaches in our reclamation and restoration plans that are more than just soil stability in plants and that occur early in the project. And these restoration projects were aiming to restore the balance in the ecosystem, but also restore the balance between all living beings. And we're working to do this by building reciprocal relationships with First Nations, with landowners, developers, regulatory agencies, to balance the needs of our clients and the communities to build long-lasting, sustainable, and resilient solutions that lift ecosystems into healthy and self-sufficient circumstances.
Okay. Wasn't expecting a podium. This is going to be hard for me. I'm a walker when I talk. I like to start out with some words that Elder Frank Patterson, Natcher-Nyack-Dun elder, sent in for this presentation. So this is from Frank. Just want to say, as an elder and landowner, under the legal agreements that were finalized in 1993 to 1995, that as a land protector, my elders of the past, God bless their souls, that we need to watch and make sure that when mining and or extraction happens and the land is stripped off, that native seeds from plants adjacent to the area are planted. Needs to be reclaimed by Yukon seeds, not the seeds from somewhere else, like BC or Alberta or Toronto. The seed is not the same. The first 2 inches of soil on top should be used for reclamation of the stripped area, not seed brought in from somewhere else. It was naturally there, and we look at putting the damaged area back to the state it was before it was touched. Reborn natural seed from the Yukon. That's it. That's all my story, and I'm sticking to it. So thanks, Frank. Okay. So I want to start with that reclamation happens somewhere. Contrary to the advertising, there is no middle of nowhere in the Yukon. Everywhere you stand, every project, every site is part of a nation's traditional territory. It's likely part of someone's strapline. It could be somebody's favorite hunting grounds. It could be the calving grounds of caribou, or maybe a really important migration route, or maybe a place where some plants are sprouting. So even if you're flying in by helicopter and you're in a really remote area and you don't see people for the whole summer while you're out there, that doesn't mean that that land isn't connected. That land has histories and names and memories. And that's one of the reasons that YSR came into being, was to try and provide a way that people who care and love about places can be involved in the reclamation process. And they focus on native plants and native seeds for very specific reasons. The plants are connected to the places. They have relationships with the life in the soil. They also have relationships with the life above ground. They provide a resilient food source for birds and bears and bees and berry pickers. They provide medicines. They provide a diversity of habitats for different forms of life. They even provide some of those ecosystem services like soil stabilization. I teach botany at the university, and this week's lecture was about plant adaptations to northern environments. It's one of my favorites, because it's a really hard place to be a plant. There's really short growing seasons. There's very cold and drying winds. There can be late spring frosts or early fall frosts. And if you're a plant and you have a lot of water, and when water freezes, it expands, you can explode your cells. It's a problem. There can be snow, which can be helpful or not. Sometimes that really shortens your growing season. It takes a long time for the snow to melt. And I'm not going to get into all of the cool adaptations that northern native plants have to deal with this, but please find me after if you're curious. But northern plants are adapted to live and to thrive in northern places. And that allows people to live and to thrive, and other life to live and to thrive. And it has been my experience both in my research, in my work with YSR, as well as my own work as a contractor here in the territory, that many people want to see the plants that they know and that they love included in the reclamation process. So one of the things that YSR does is partner with other organizations to do training and education and workshops on native plants and native seed collection. And the project I'm going to talk about today is a project that was done in partnership with the First Nation of Natcher-Nyack-Dun. So we worked as kind of looked at, okay, we have a bigger vision of there's a lot of development in their traditional territory. You know, are people interested? trying to assess the curiosity. Does somebody want to be involved? Is there interest in building skills and knowledge and being involved with seeds and reclamation? So we worked really closely with Helena Moses, who is the mining reclamation coordinator at the First Nation, because we had to figure out what a workshop looked like in Mayo. What makes sense there? Because every community is different, every nation is different, every place and project is different, which was talked about in the previous presentation. So what's going to make sense here? And we spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. We started thinking about workshops in January and February. Workshops didn't actually happen until June and September. It's a long time to try and work through this. And there was a few things that came up that were really important. See, I'm trying to walk. A big one was language revitalization. Northern Shoshone is the language spoken by the First Nation, and it was really important that that was integrated into all of the work that they were involved in and doing. Thinking about plants more broadly, not just thinking about how do we extract seeds from the plants. Thinking about those values of reciprocity and respect and relationship. How can we do this in a good way? What does that look like? And what does that mean to the First Nation? What are the local protocols? Again, it's going to be different. We spent a lot of time talking about harvesting practices and protocols and reaching out to knowledge holders and to elders to be part of this workshop and teach us how to do it well. No person has all of the knowledge, so we needed to create a space for sharing. And if you've ever done work in Mayo, you also know that it had to have food. Coming together and sharing meals and spending that time to just chat was a really big part of what we did in that workshop. And this takes time. We did 2 days in June, we did 2 days in September, and that, it doesn't take a long time to learn how to, collect seeds from a grass, but it does take time to learn how to do that in a good way and in a relationship. And this gave us time to get to know each other and to get to know plants. One of the things that we worked on in order to do this was we made a booklet. Helena and I worked on kind of coming up with some of the species that we were likely to use. She consulted some of her elders about the different names in Northern Shoshone. We had pictures. How do you identify them? What kind of habitats do they like? How do you collect seeds? What are some of the traditional uses? And what's notable about this booklet is there's a lot of blank space. This was something we used to share knowledge with and to write down and to learn from each other. If anybody wants to check it out after, let me know. And I hope that you can see that we were doing a lot more than just picking seeds at this workshop. There was a lot more going on. I was reading through some of the feedback this morning preparing for this presentation, and one of the ones that came out or stood out to me was like, oh, having time to laugh together, come together, open conversation. It was great to see people listening to each other. We were building a community around plants and learning together. And while these might seem like really small, inconsequential conversations, this is starting small and building trust and understanding and values and just getting to know each other. What's important? People are different. Places are different. And starting to understand different cultures and practices. And this sets you up to be able to make bigger decisions later. Reclamation is hard. Nobody wants to say, like, oh, step 1, 2, 3. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's unexpected. You're working with other forms of life. Plants have their own agendas. They do what they want. But it's also important that the people who love and care about the land are included in decisions about reclamation, because ultimately they are the ones that have to live with the results. So plants don't grow quickly in the north, and neither do relationships. One of the cool examples of how this can grow is that when we did a workshop in June, and then when we went back in September, people heard that we were coming out, and we got invited to go to the school and do a program with the high school students on seed cleaning. So if you can imagine a bunch of people with berries and potato mashers and bowls, like mashing up your berries and trying to float off the pulp and clean out the seeds, we had a good time. And Frank, who you heard from through me at the beginning, came out, and Helena and the three of us put that together. It was done in partnership. There's other cool partnerships coming down the line too that we can't yet talk about, but please stay tuned. And I just really want to stress that there's no general seed mix for the Yukon, just like there's no general formula for creating connections. It is hard, but it is doable. But it is only doable in partnership. So I would like to thank the Climate Change Health Adaptation Fund that helped make those projects happen, as well as the corporate sponsors, and I was thrilled to get to be invited and be involved in it.
Thank you, Crystal. We couldn't have done it without you. And we learn a lot from our community training programs. We learn a lot about, the time that it takes to build relationships, and what people are interested in growing and what plants that are valuable to them and why. And we try and bring those teachings that we get during those programs into our work. And so today I'm going to share one of our projects that we work with Snowline Gold, to give you an example of what it looks like to go through this process of reclamation. So the process of reclamation, as we mentioned before, is continuous and it's cyclical. So at the beginning, and this beginning is the beginning as early as we possibly can muster. When the project starts, thinking about reclamation has to start. And so we start with site assessment, talking about spending time to understand the land and understand the relationships. And then we can start planning and talking about what our goals for reclamation are and what we hope to see as the outcomes in the future. And once we know what we want to achieve, then we can start implementing these reclamation activities. An implementation of reclamation activities can start at the beginning, and we'll see that as we go through this example. And after those activities are implemented, we need to see if they're meeting the results that we had hoped for, and refining our process to ensure that we achieve those goals that we set from the beginning. So with Snowline Gold, they came to Yukon Seed and Restoration in early 2021, just as they were beginning their field season, to discuss opportunities for building their reclamation plans from the beginning, and also for developing their own native seed supply that is site-specific to their region. And so when we came on to the Snowline site, we spent time on the land spending time observing and trying to understand the processes that were going on. And the processes that were going on ecologically with the ecosystems, but also the processes that were going on at Snowline and how their company operates and what activities they were doing, so that we could best understand how we can implement reclamation within their existing structure. So using the information that we gathered through the site assessment process, we started to understand what types of activities are happening and plan for what types of reclamation activities we'll need to implement. And this planning process was relatively small at the beginning. In this case, we're talking about reclamation of drill pad sites, so 10 by 10 sites that are quite small relatively in the grand scheme of mining activities. And having these discussions about planning and developing a reclamation plan for a small area really allowed us to build a relationship and develop those plans that we know will be used further in the future for larger disturbances as Snowline begins to grow. And the importance of this is that we, in terms of developing a framework and a plan for reclamation at this small scale, is that we can begin to understand how to implement these reclamation plans and also what the results might be, but we're doing it at a small scale. And so, as Crystal mentioned, plants have their own agenda. And sometimes you have a bad growing season, there's not enough rain, or there's a late spring frost or an early fall frost. and your planned activities don't go as planned. That's why reclamation has to be adaptable, but that's also why we love to start small and start early, because it gives us those opportunities to learn and understand in a site-specific context what works and maybe what we need to work on to work within that system. So the reclamation activities that we focused on for drill pads, these are small areas, and the benefit that we had was that we started pre-disturbance. And so we can start to take into account how our disturbance is occurring to prevent having to do extensive reclamation at the end. And so some of the pre-disturbance activities that we conducted were things like stockpiling the overburdened material, removing the vegetative mat and preserving it for use later, and salvaging any woody debris like trees that had been taken down. And ensuring that we keep those materials is crucial to ensuring that we can see plants taking root and growing in the future. And so post-disturbance, we were able to use those same materials and place them back on the site, clean the site up. And that allowed us to limit any other very intense reclamation activities that might have otherwise been necessary. Things like propagating and growing native plants in a nursery down south and shipping them all the way up north. So these types of planning opportunities really reduce the long-term requirements for reclamation in the future. So what's next for the relationship between Snowline Gold and Yukon Seed? We're continuing to monitor the results for the reclamation of these drill pad areas. We're continuing to co-develop a relationship and a reclamation framework for how we're going to conduct reclamation together. And we began discussing opportunities to invite members of the local community to come share their knowledge about the land that Snowline is working on, as well as building opportunities for Yukon Seed to create meaningful careers for NND citizens to contribute to these projects as well. So Steve has graciously joined us on stage to have a quick conversation about the relationship between Snowline Gold and Yukon Seed and how that started, and from his perspective as the operations manager at Snowline Gold, the value that that has brought Snowline. So I'm going to do my best to transition over this way. Is this, oh, there we go. That's my voice. Beautiful. So, Steve, thank you again for coming to join us. We really appreciate it, and it's great to chat.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks.
So I have a few questions prepared, and we're going to have a bit of a discussion. I'm going to try and keep it as informal as possible on a stage. So the timing of reclamation is really what has, and the timing that Snowline had in approaching YSR is really what brought some of our success. What types of environmental initiatives was Snowline planning from the beginning of their exploration program, and how did YSR fit into that plan?
Yeah, so Snowline as a company is less than 2 years old at this point. Now, the claims in the areas we're working on extend beyond that timeline. However, basically, there was very little surface disturbance in any prior work. And so when Snowline was formed, it became very important for us to first set out some practical foundation to build up as a company. And 4 aspects of that foundation include environmental respect, building community, going big. And when I say going big, there's a tendency, in a geological conversation to talk about the size of the deposits we hope to find. But it doesn't stop there. The concept of going big has to involve a big picture view. And this initiative is part of that. And the last one is really important. It's doing it right. So that is sort of how we tie all of those other foundations together. It's going beyond the permit. It's going beyond the objective of finding gold. It's really speaking to the place that we are working in and the people that share the area with us. And so with that foundation involved, like Rashida was saying earlier, us coming in prior to any field work. We sat down with them and said, okay, what does it look like for us to begin this process of progressive reclamation and ongoing that circular work? So you guys got to be out there early on in the process and helping us figure out what reclamation looks like at the beginning. So that was certainly a big part of that planning work that happened back in 2021. But it's extended beyond that to some initiatives with YG's Department of the Environment as it relates to some wildlife data collection, beyond just like wildlife logs of observing what we see out there, but to more thorough studies. It's our solar power project. It was another environmental initiative that got off the ground pretty early, and you'll see that presentation on Tuesday if you're interested. But in general, the key here is starting with the framework, the frame of thought of that foundation of environmental respect, building community, going big, and doing it right. And if you have that built into the company, then you have the opportunity to see and identify opportunities early on, and this was one of them.
Thanks for sharing that, Steve. I think that was something that we were impressed by as a company that works in reclamation. It's not every day that you have a company come to you early. It's often you have companies you work with and you're begging them to bring you in or to work on projects that you're getting started on. And so that opportunity to work with Snowline from the get-go really gave us opportunity to learn more about how to build those relationships and develop a framework that we can share with others and say, this is how we can do this together and make it work really well for both of us. And so, as I said, this is relatively new work, and there have been plenty of learning opportunities, but there have been challenges. What have been some of the takeaways that you've had from doing reclamation work with Yukon Seed?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway about, again, starting early in this process is the opportunity. You start small and you fail small. So at the beginning of a project, your scale of disturbance is a 10 by 10 drill pad is not a huge area. And so by beginning right at the beginning, at the start, or having these conversations, welcoming YSR to site and encouraging them to understand what's happening, we can make a little mistake, and thankfully we haven't made too many of those. And I wouldn't quite say mistake, but if something happens, it doesn't work out the way we expected, and we talked about that a little bit earlier this morning. How the living things are dynamic, right? Just ask my wife. The way I think about things is always not the same, and what I think is going to happen is not always going to happen when I tell her I'm going away for a conference. But nevertheless, the point is that living things, they change and they adapt, and by beginning at small scale, we can understand what that adaptation is going to look like at bigger scales as hopefully we continue to grow. And so we can adjust and improve and monitor as things are happening, and also to ramp up. So building a database of a bank of seeds is a big project, and so we are able to our reclamation is really proceeding at the pace of our development rather than starting late in the process and trying to play catch up and come in and have 100 pads to reclaim. Now we're starting with a small. We can reclaim at pace. We can grow and learn so that when it is, hopefully we like to see development. I mean, we're in the business of finding gold, that there is scale involved. We already know and understand the land that we're working on very well, and we have partners that understand and know the land very well, and that enables us to do things really effectively and in a far more natural way.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, that is definitely that learning process can be challenging for sure, and why it can be so helpful to start small and be able to learn at that scale versus learning at a site-wide scale, which can be really intimidating for all parties. What have been some notable successes from our work over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think building off that last comment where we were saying how getting in early makes things easy. It allows us to make smaller mistakes, and to fix those mistakes earlier and then build them out at scale based on what we learn. So that we start with that foundation, but then the consequence of that is it means that it's very rapid. The process of restoration it can happen quickly. It means that we have a smaller footprint at any given time than we otherwise would trying to come back after the fact. So the reclamation and the process of restoration is happening almost immediately after the drill leaves a site. And then there's a financial aspect of that as well for companies here thinking, okay, what does it look like to begin at this stage? That by carrying out these activities immediately and incorporating them as part of the natural cycle of drilling and exploration, now you're spreading the financial cost, A, over a broader period, so it's a smaller chunk at any given time. But B, it means that you're never having to remobilize equipment or personnel or tools to a site to carry out these activities. So it's happening at pace. It's happening in a very efficient way that over the long haul provides benefit to the company, and that's key. And then there's some more like really functional and tangible benefits. One, like we're building up a pretty big bank of seeds already. We're building those seeds from we have a pretty big property, and we're able to collect seeds from various specific areas on our target to talk about like what Frank was saying earlier, where it's this seed is coming right from site, right adjacent to where we're doing work, and it's going back there. And then through that work and some of the relationships that David and Rashida and others from the company have done, we've been able to start having conversations with broader partners beyond just the Yukon. So the National Tree Seed Center, we've had some conversations with them about contributing to their national database of seeds. And for one, they're pretty scarce on the Yukon to begin with. But two, like we're in a pretty unique and remote part of the Yukon. So otherwise, or we are using this opportunity to, like the work we are able to do is contributing to really a national and even global resource. We are providing that data and to other partners, so we can take the surplus, we can provide it to others, and that has some pretty big consequences as far as things like land use planning. In a remote area where we are working, land use is more limited than other parts of the territory, and it's also less understood by the broader public. So, by capturing this data in these unique and remote areas, and this is just one aspect of that types of data that we're trying to collect now, we are able to contribute to the land use planning process down the road. So it becomes more, we can plan to use the land more effectively when we understand it more fully. And with working with partners like this and getting people out on the land, now we have a wholesome picture. And being an exploration company, being able to contribute to that process is something that we take a lot of pride in, and we really want to make sure that when it comes time, and we hope it will come time sooner rather than later to get to that land use process, then we are able to provide value and say, okay, now we have a more fulsome understanding about how to use this land effectively and be good stewards of it as we work there for the time that we are there.
Yeah, understanding current conditions can be really valuable as projects move forward, but also as land use planning processes occur. And there are many discussions going on in the Yukon about land use planning. There are many discussions going on within the First Nation of Natchez about land use planning. How has your work with Yukon Seed helped build relationships with the First Nation?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We're kind of a unique company in some respects because, like I said, we're less than 2 years old, but we are founded upon the work of a Yukon family. I've seen the senior Berdal out here today, and the junior Berdal will be here tomorrow. I think he's getting in from Europe, and so in some respects, this is not in some respects. In every respect, this company was founded by people who deeply care about the community and the place that they call home, and not just from their own perspective, but for the others around here in the territory. So it really is home. It matters. And if, as I said earlier, one of our pillars truly is building community, then we must work together and use this as a vehicle to do that. Now, how does a company now suddenly, where we have grown from just a family operation to a company that has accountability to shareholders and everything else, that those two often get put in conflict with one another, and they don't have to. And thankfully, we've found vehicles to use our history, and then similarly, where NNDDC, the National Dun Development Corporation, is in many respects the outgrowth of the family that is the National Dun. We can act as proxies working together. So we found that middle ground where we can, as a company, we can work with another company to align objectives and find projects where we can learn about each other and what our interests and goals are, and find alignment wherever possible. And this is just one of the example of that, where we really care about the area we're working in, and so do the First Nation of Nacho Dun. Now we are able to translate some of the funds that the investors and shareholders have provided to our company to conduct exploration. So there's a dollar aspect that is going directly towards the community. But beyond that, there's an opportunity for real meaningful growth of capacity within the community for skills that add not just a job, but a real career and meaningful contributions, because jobs end if Snowline, or when Snowline eventually, whether we hope that's a long time from now, but at some point that mine, if there is a mine ever built there, like that does end. But skills and meaningful contributions beyond that become an intergenerational benefit to those citizens. So as Snowline, as an extension of one family, and the Nacho Den Development Corporation as an extension of another, we find alignment there that we can work together and provide long-lasting and meaningful contributions. And so we can talk at that high level, but at the functional level, you've heard an example where Frank cited exactly what we are doing together already. That is the work that we are doing. And nobody knows the land better than citizens themselves. And so you take that knowledge of the traditional territory, of the land, and work through Yukon Cedar and Restoration and apply that knowledge to a new context. And suddenly now you really are building that capacity. You're building that value within the First Nation. And suddenly now the interests of YSR, and by extension, the Nacho Dun, become aligned with us as a company and the family that is sort of behind that company. And to me, that is an example of a way that we can move forward with the reconciliation process. Like, that's what reconciliation truly looks like. We started at the beginning. Relationships take time, as does the growth of seed. And this is an example of, okay, what does it really look like to form a relationship? We're just getting to know each other too. We're starting small with 10 by 10 plots, but we're also starting small with a small relationship that we want to see grow and blossom over time.
Yeah, we've been really fortunate to work together and have this time to discuss opportunities for the future and how we can provide those meaningful careers to NND citizens, and how how traditional knowledge and the knowledge of the land can be shared between Snowline and between the citizens of NND. Just keeping an eye on the time, I want to ask for the audience, is there advice that you have to other exploration companies that are looking to start their reclamation processes and discussions?
But before we jump there, I do want to add one point, because I think there's an important consideration that I don't want to miss here, and that is that the geological minds in the room here are going to know that as you build out and develop a model for a mine, like, first of all, every mine is unique, every deposit is unique, and so while it may be part of a broader sort of style, you can build on that and understand it. But the characteristics of any given ore body are going to be totally different, and so you don't understand that. You're working blind, and over time, like, that's what the drilling and that's what the exploration provides, that understanding. Now, it's no different for what's happening on the surface either, and this is something we just were chatting about casually this morning, is that the superficial understanding of the land needs to keep pace with the subsurface understanding of the land. And so this work is a method, a vehicle for us to understand the superficial characteristics of the land and allow it to grow at pace with what's happening underneath the ground. Because if we are going to be thinking full cycle, which mines must, right? Eventually they do close if they are successful. Then if you've been started at the very beginning with that small scale grassroots exploration, you were starting at the small scale grassroots development, then when it comes time to reconciliation, you can do that with a deeper understanding, a far deeper and thorough understanding where you've tested things out at the small scale and grown them at pace with the development. And that's really what we are hoping to accomplish as we continue to work in the territory that we do.
That's great. That I think really speaks to why we build relationships and why we take the time to do that. And that idea of having reciprocity and being able to engage, to share, and to have mutual understanding. So to back to my last question, Steve, do you have any advice for exploration partners who and companies who are looking to incorporate reclamation planning into their processes?
Yeah, one small piece. We actually had a debrief with one of our pad builders today, our lead pad builder, and just about how the season went. And one aspect that came up was he said it was great to have YSR on site and provide their insight on how to reclaim, because there were several small things he said that made he helped him rethink how he was building pads and how he was doing things. Now, what's interesting about that conversation was that had he not heard that, and we had built out 100 pads over the course of our project or whatever it may be, we could have and would have reclaimed them in such a way that was sufficient to satisfy our permits. But those little things make a difference beyond just the satisfaction of the permit. They just make things easier for the natural revegetation and to occur. And so by doing that at pad 1 and pad 2, then pads 2 to 100 are done correctly. And then it isn't even reclamation. At that point, it's just doing it right as the process goes. And there we are back at one of our foundational points of we need to do things right. And that's an example of what that looks like. So my advice here, the point of that comment, and to answer your question, is we got to get started. It is so beneficial to do it right from the hop before you've cut that first opening, before you've opened that first trench. Get in there and have the crew take a look and understand your site, and then they can grow their knowledge at pace, and it's affordable. This isn't like a bank breaking endeavor when you start and work in this way. And in fact, it is a cost saving measure, as I just pointed out. It takes time to do it, and if you just start at the beginning, it's easy. You'll get great insights. The people coming in will understand your project more thoroughly over time, and then it forms a working relationship that really is beneficial for the people, the community, and the lands on which we operate.
That is a great message that I can only echo about starting early. I think something that we have conversations with people about all the time. So that's all the time that we have today. If you do want to have any of those type of conversations with us, come find us. The NNDDC folks as well as the YSR folks are in the room. If you want to give a little wave, you can find them at any point in time. Chat with us, talk about what that process might look like, and discuss how we might be able to support your project. We're really excited to hear more about the exploration that's going on in the Yukon right now and the different projects that are happening. And so we'll be around. And thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to the Geoscience Forum for having us. It's been a pleasure to have this opportunity.